Mountain News, first at 4, continues. World leaders are descending on the United Nations General Assembly in New York this week, and with several raging conflicts, stressed alliances, and a host of overseas threats, President Joe Biden and whoever becomes his successor are up against a litany of foreign crises. WYMT Washington Bureau correspondent Julia Benbrook tells us about the engagements.
President Joe Biden is traveling to New York this week for the United Nations General Assembly. He will address the delegates on Tuesday.
I think the president will challenge the United Nations by when we come together, we can solve world problems.
The president will meet with leaders to discuss a wide range of topics, including working to find diplomatic solutions to a number of crises.
We want to work to find peace. So we're putting all of our efforts behind peace and security, not just in Gaza and Israel and Lebanon, but we're also focusing on Sudan. We're focusing on Ukraine.
And as Biden remains busy with an intense stretch of diplomatic engagements, attention on the world stage is already shifting to Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump as leaders prepare for the future.
They're trying to measure out Vice President Harris's foreign policy views, which aren't all that well known at this point. And of course, what they do know about former President Trump, much of which has the traditional American allies deeply on edge.
According to multiple U.S. officials, representatives for Harris and Trump are fielding requests from dozens of countries reaching out to get FaceTime with the candidates. Reporting in Washington, I'm Julia Benbrook.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the government is continuing to defend against misinformation online. Blinken spoke at the Freedom Online Coalition ministerial event on AI for Humanity, charting the global course for human rights-based governance. The Secretary of State says officials are defending democracy more and more on the internet.
Members are working to build a more resilient global information system and to hold accountable those seeking to undermine democratic elections. Critically, we're shaping the frameworks and the rules for the responsible development and use of artificial intelligence, technology that perhaps more than any other will affect the future of freedoms, online and offline.
Blinken says they've created the world's first multilateral hub on AI and human rights, hoping to set a foundation for how artificial intelligence works. Despite calls to resign, one politician is still campaigning. North Carolina Lieutenant Governor and Republican nominee for governor Mark Robinson hosted a meet and greet campaign event in the state. That event comes as several of Robinson's campaign staff have resigned, and he faces calls from both Democrats and Republicans to drop out. According to a CNN investigation, Robinson posted several explicit comments on a pornographic website more than a decade ago.
Well, we are seeing a line of showers and thunderstorms push through portions of eastern Kentucky. Take a look at the scene in Pikeville right now. Courtesy of the Pikeville Medical Center webcam, you can see the rain is just coming down at a steady pace. And right now we're seeing temperatures still in the 70s and 80s. We're at 82 in Pikeville, 85 in Jackson, Prestonsburg. Good afternoon. You're at 86 degrees, 83 in London, 10 cooler in Williamsburg. So there's that cell near Pikeville. The thing that you're noticing, lightning is not being picked up with that cell. Same story over towards the Feds Creek area. We'll go ahead and move over towards the Monticello Pine Knot area, where we are seeing some lightning being picked up with that cell. And then we're seeing some heavy rain just south of Somerset. And then over towards Hazard and Manchester, seeing some heavy rain at this time. A little bit of lightning being picked up on the cell just south of Manchester. And you can see the big perspective, how we have a lot more rain off towards the west. This is something we will be monitoring as we go into the next several hours. We'll see a temperature of 76 by 9 p.m., 69 by the 1 to 3 o'clock time frame, then upper 60s by 5 a.m. So when you wake up in the morning, temperatures in the 50s or 60s will greet you. Now the question is, how long will the rain chances last? We'll talk about that. Plus, we'll talk about the tropics coming up in a few minutes. Steve.
All right, definitely heard some thunder here in Hazard a bit ago. Thank you, Eric. The Israeli military says its air force has struck more than 300 Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. That follows dozens of rocket assaults from the militant group into northern Israel during the weekend. President Joe Biden previously said the U.S. will do everything it can to keep a wider war from breaking out. CBS's Chris Livesay reports from Tel Aviv.
Israeli missiles slam into southern Lebanon. The early morning silence shattered as Israel targets Hezbollah weapons, hidden, it says, sometimes inside residential buildings.
We advise civilians from Lebanese villages located in and next to buildings and areas used by Hezbollah for military purpose to immediately move out of harm's way for their own safety.
The onslaught comes after a week of strategic blows to Hezbollah, from exploding pagers and walkie-talkies to a strike in southern Beirut that killed a top commander of the U.S.-designated terror group that's been lobbing rockets into Israel for nearly a year. Some of them landing in the suburbs of Haifa over the weekend, not far from the Rambam Hospital, Israel's second largest. Doctors and nurses are now taking dramatic evasive measures.
This is supposed to be a parking garage. You can see the parking space numbers painted on the wall, the arrows on the ground, but it's become a fully functional hospital. In fact, they've already had their first childbirth.
We could do major surgery here, and we have done it.
Dr. Avi Weissman is the director.
How many hospital beds are we talking about?
So altogether, we could squeeze in here 2,200 hospital beds.
We're in a bunker with many, many more beds. What does that say about the war?
We need to be prepared for the worst case scenario.
Now it's here in the north, Israel says, where the war effort is shifting. But that doesn't mean it's forgotten about Gaza in the south. Over the weekend, 2 schools were struck there, killing more than 20 people. Israel says at least one of them had been turned into a Hamas command center. And overnight, a strike on a residential house killed a mother and her 4 children. Already caught in the crossfire, more than 1 million displaced Gazans this morning also had to contend with severe flooding.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's now weighing plans to lay siege to Hamas's remaining forces in northern Gaza. But the main focus here has clearly swung towards Israel's much bigger and better armed enemy, Hezbollah, in Lebanon, where airstrikes are ongoing. Chris Livesay, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
As Russia's war on Ukraine continues, President Volodymyr Zelensky is making stops in the United States to show appreciation for those helping his country. The Ukrainian president visited a Pennsylvania Army ammunition plant to thank workers for their help in supplying needed ammunition. Zelensky met with several officials as a small crowd, including Ukrainian community members, gathered to welcome him. Nearly 2,000 former NFL players participated in a Harvard University questionnaire on perceived CTE symptoms. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is thought to be caused by repeated head injuries. The study participants described having cognitive difficulties, headaches, and other symptoms stemming from their days on the field. Study author Dr. Rachel Grashow says while CTE cannot be treated, doctors can help with many of the symptoms.
While we can't go back and change the fact that they had head injury, and we can't know if they actually have it, there's actually so much that we can do that we learned from this study, such as, can we go after their low testosterone, their depression? Can we go after sleep apnea? And all these things that are actually impacting their cognitive function now that we can do something about.
Symptoms of CTE include cognitive impairment, behavioral changes, and mood disorders. In the group of players, a quarter said they have frequent suicidal thoughts. Welcome back, Tracy Dyson. The NASA astronaut departed the International Space Station this morning and landed back on Earth several hours later. CBS's Leah Mishkin reports.
Some hugs goodbye, a wave, and off they went.
The pre-undocking checks were completed.
3 crew members, including NASA astronaut Tracy Dyson, undocked from the International Space Station Monday morning to head back to Earth.
During my previous missions, we were assembling the space station, and using the space station as a laboratory was just in the infancy of...
Flight engineer Dyson spent about 6 months aboard the ISS. According to NASA, her mission spanned 2,944 orbits of the Earth, a 78 million mile journey.
To come here and do science.
Also on board the Soyuz capsule, Russian cosmonauts Nikolai Chub and Oleg Kononenko, who both completed the longest continuous stay at the orbiting lab, 374 days.
There is the jettisoning of the heat shield right on time.
According to NASA, Kononenko completed his 5th flight into space, clocking an all-time record of 1,111 days in orbit. And touchdown. The Soyuz landed on the steppe of Kazakhstan.
A textbook touchdown on the steppe of
The crew was helped off the spacecraft one by one and welcomed back to Earth.
And there's Nikolai Chub, wrapping up the first flight in his career.
Leah Mishkin, CBS News, London.
The crewmates were helicoptered to a staging city before boarding flights to their home countries. Dyson will fly to Houston, Texas, where NASA's Johnson Space Center is located.